I want to share another little message with you, where just to look at something from the Torah portion really quickly. There's a teaching that I discovered from this incredible woman I met years and years and years ago. Her name is Alice Shalvi. Alice Shalvi is one of the founders of the Israel Women's Network. This is the major organization in the state of Israel advocating for equality for women in Israel. It was a feminist organization, and she is an Orthodox. Today she would call herself a halachic woman, but always identified with traditional Judaism within the Jewish community. And Alice Shalvi, I knew her when I worked for the New Israel Fund years and years and years ago. And she looks at this Torah portion, this Torah portion, Kitavo, as transitions, because we're coming to the end of the story of Deuteronomy, right? The book of Deuteronomy. We're seeing that the folks who have left Egypt have died, a new generation is born into freedom, and they're just about to move into the land of Israel to build this new incredible society. And it's all transitions. And one of the things that we see in the text, it reminds us that when you enter the land, that the first thing that you're going to do when you first get a harvest is not to say, wow, we're here, this is great, let's eat, but is to make an offering of those first fruits. Your act of gratitude is to recognize your connection to the land, and they give it to God. So there's an offering of the first few fruits, and when you have that offering in this land, expressing that gratitude, you have to say this to the priest that's in charge. You say, you shall then recite as follows to Adonai, our God, my father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us. They oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried out to God, the God of our fathers and mothers who came before us, and God heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. God saw all of it. God freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand and outstretched arm and awesome power and signs and cool things. And then God brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land that is going to be filled with potential and promise, not just a land that was promised, but it is going to be filled with promise. Alice Shalvi looks at the transitions of our lives. This week, I've been to the mikveh with somebody kind of making a transition in their Jewish journey. I've been to a Brit Chaim, a new baby within our community, and entering her into the covenant. I'm here to celebrate Shabbat with you. We see another part of our life cycle with a retirement or a realignment for some. We see a wedding that's coming up. All of these things are different markers. And we've always experienced that. Different times, different experiences in our journey. How do we mark it? For the ancient Israelites, finally getting to the promised land, they gave thanks by making an offering and saying, these very first fruits is going to show gratitude for everything that I got and didn't deserve. How incredible. And is going to recognize not just the moment of gratitude, but how little I had, because my father, they say in the text, was a refugee who had nothing and no place and were hurt. And so to mark our transitions and to understand where we're going, we have to look backwards and replay, re-experience what we have been through, so that that confession of the farmer is going to make sense. That the message at the Brit Chaim this morning for a new baby, messages under a chuppah on Sunday, a celebration of whatever it is, that it's going to make sense. So we look backwards a little bit to try and figure out where we have been in order to understand where we are going. There is a rededication that happens with that ancient farmer, and there is a rededication to us in our lives and our journeys every time we have a new moment. And one of the things that comes from this text that is really so significant just a little bit later is the reminder that we are supposed to be an Am Segula. Am Segula. Now, a lot of people will say that we're a chosen people, but I never really liked the translation in English. I think it's too easy to misinterpret. as if there's a Jewish chip on our shoulder. That's not what this is about. We have been chosen to receive the Torah. We have been singled out for a particular kind of relationship, and other peoples have other relationships, and it's all kosher. It's all kosher. In order to find redemption according to classic Jewish tradition, you don't have to be Jewish. Isn't that amazing? There is room for other paths. But this is the path that I have. This is the path that a lot of us have. And so we get to celebrate being singled out. And if we are singled out, it has to mean that there's a purpose to be singled out. So if the purpose about remembering that we were once refugees and we had nothing and no land and vulnerability, and we cried out and God heard and brought us to a place filled with potential in order to build something extraordinary, well, that's our message. That's what the Jewish people is supposed to have been listening to all of these centuries. And I think we have, because we're still here. Gosh, if you think about that, after everything in Jewish history, we're still here. For me, that's kind of mind-boggling. How many obstacles and barriers have there been? And we're still here in Boulder, not even New York. I'm okay with being singled out. I'm okay with us recommitting to living lives of distinction. And I'm okay with seeing that they experienced the land of Israel with promise, and today, I'm still that Zionist. Now, I'm not so much the political Zionist. It's not enough for me to have a state of Israel. I want more. I want a state of Israel. I'm a spiritual Zionist, a progressive spiritual Zionist, because I want a safe and secure state of Israel, to be sure, but I also want it to be the Israel that's going to celebrate the values where every Jew is going to be welcomed and celebrated, and understanding that there's more than one way to be Jewish, aside from what the chief rabbi says. I believe that there are lots of ways to experience this, and how we can have a society filled with promise, using democracy and human rights and Jewish values in order to celebrate being a Jewish state. Israelis just had their second elections within 6 months. We'll see if there's going to be a third. It's kind of a tricky scenario. The numbers are kind of complicated, but what we tend to see is that there's a desire to bring some healing into a very complicated place amongst themselves so that they can live and move forward. That's my hope for Israel after the elections. You can go to the newspapers for the analysis. The spiritual part of how we look at the elections is a desire that we can see and feel to make the state of Israel a Jewish state based on the values of the Jewish people beyond survival. And we can take those same ideas and those same commitments and bring it into our lives and think about our own transitions and figuring out where we are going. And we know where we're going by looking at our past and not staying there, but to try and figure out how that's going to move us toward an incredible, bright, and beautiful future. Our families really were refugees, and they had pain and sorrow. And God extended a hand, and they got to a new beginning, a new place. And they started over with a mission to be a light unto the nations. That is our mission still. How do we find our place in that story so that generations later, they're going to think back to us and figure out what role did we play in being a light and bringing forth light, being builders, shaping a vision and a world with justice and compassion. That's a good way for us to think about this time of Elul, approaching a new beginning with a new year. So I wish all of us that we go from strength to strength and bring I think, what is God's vision to a reality. Let's turn